Hello, Asuminara here, back with more tips on how to tank. On today's how-to, we're looking at how to control your enemies. One of the most important things a tank can do that will distinguish them from other tanks is their own positioning and movement, and how they control and handle enemies. It may be tempting to give in to DPS demands and pull everything, but if you really aren't comfortable with doing so, then you have no reason to jeopardize other players. To be able to pull rooms at a time, it's important to know which enemies will be problematic if left unchecked. In this footage right here, you can see me marking a few mobs, one of which will try to mind control a groupmate, another who will be casting shields on all enemy targets, and another who will be throwing powerful hots on itself. With some coordinated stuns, silences, and dispels, we're able to destroy the group without any problems. I like to use raid marker icons to highlight threatening targets for players to pay attention to, so that even if I can't get to it myself, someone else can pick out which mobs are better to keep an eye on for stuns and silences. Raid marker icons can be set under key bindings under target markers. Although it isn't necessary to have them all bound, it is helpful if you can find a comfortable way to do so. I'll be talking about key bindings in another video. One more thing to note about raid marker icons. Personally, I like to mark tanks and healers, even in dungeon groups. This lets DPS know where the tank is, where not to stand to avoid being cleaved or breathed on, and if they died from a steady lack of healing, not to blame healers because they were nowhere near them. A lot of mobs may like to remain glued in one spot rather than follow you around, which can make it difficult to clump them up and use AoE to burn them down. If there are casters in any group, recognize them and make sure they're interrupted or silenced as you pull them to a safe location. If you're a Death Knight, you have access to two of the most useful tank abilities in the game, Death Grip and Gorfiend's Grasp. The latter of which can be used on both friendly and enemy targets, not just yourself. It will grab all enemies within range of that target, making it an incredibly powerful tool for dungeons and even some raid situations. This right here is footage from Baby Jace's gold time run of challenge mode Auchindoun. Using Gorfiend's Grasp, he's able to take all of the mobs right into the center for quick disposal. If you don't have a Death Knight around, you can always resort to the classic tactic of LOS. LOS, or Line of Sight, is another way to get mobs to come to you. It is the requirement of a target to be able to cast on you without any obstructions in the way. Walls are not the only obstructions, but are the most common way of triggering enemies to walk to you. You can always ask hunters to misdirect to you and wait around a corner for enemies to approach. Rogues can also use tricks of the trades to apply their threat to you should any additional mobs enter any fights. When enemies walk to you, they have to be in range to hit you with their weapons or fists, and how close they get to you varies based on how big their hitbox is. Get comfortable reading how close a mob has to stand to you before it decides to move. This can be unbelievably frustrating for melee DPS, who need to be behind a target that's dancing around the tank because they decided to move an inch. Sorry. In this example, we're looking at an Elec. A warrior's charge brings you exactly to an enemy's current hitbox. They will not move afterwards, even if immune to the root effect. You can then pivot around them and make them spin to your liking without moving them so long as you remain close. Pulling back, you still have some range with melee abilities before they will start moving in closer again. So, let's talk about crowd control. The game itself has names and categories for all forms of CC. This has been changed from one expansion to the next to help prevent infinite control in PvE and PvP with diminishing returns. Because of diminishing returns affecting groups of abilities rather than the same one alone, crowd control can be difficult in some cases, but variety in application will trivialize its dampening effect. Stuns are pretty obvious, prevent all actions, and are most useful because of your ability to continue doing damage without breaking them. Incapacitates are often broken on the first source of damage, but are still very powerful because of the ability to use them to stop spellcasting. This is not an interrupt, but it will prevent the spell from finishing its cast. Some mobs will trigger a cooldown after casting a spell, so this can stop them from being entirely threatening on its own. Interrupts are the more traditional spellcast end of choice, because they lock that school of magic for an extended period of time. Physical abilities aren't really a school of magic, so they don't count, but if a spell is a Shadow Frost or any other double combination, both schools of magic will be interrupted. Silences are a preventative measure that won't allow any magical spells through. Casted physical abilities will still slip through a silence. Interesting note, though, a warrior cannot use Thunderclap while silenced. Roots and snares do not prevent spellcasting or taking action, but often allow you the space you need to act without being attacked physically by these targets, or be in range of their spells in some cases. Lastly, there are knockback and knockdown effects, which are very rare but incredibly useful. This is also another form of interrupt and have the added benefit of moving mobs where you need them to be. This is how the game looks at crowd control, and all player abilities will fall into one of these categories, like Blind and Gouge from a Rogue and a Warrior Fear being Incapacitates, or Shaman Thunderstorm, Hunter Explosive Traps, and Druid Ursul's Vortex being considered knockbacks. Triggering multiple of the same type of CC will make targets half as affected and then immune to said effects, so do be careful, especially avoiding stacking them on top of one another, as you won't gain any particular benefit from doing so. Now let's take a look at some class-specific options we have. Warriors, as I stated, have Charge, also Intervene, which can be used on your own Mocking Banner, and Heroic Leap. What better way to reduce incoming damage than to be so far away you're taking no damage at all? Make sure you're still close enough to your healer though. And if you see a bunch of casters scheming around you, Intimidating Shout will do the job of shutting them up for another couple seconds. Who cares if it's broken immediately? It's better than letting a flash heal out or a chaos bolt onto the healer. And do take advantage of Shockwave and Spell Reflect. Mass stuns, like Shockwave, Shaman Capacitor Totem, or a Binding Shot from Hunters will reduce incoming damage to 0 so long as the mob can be stunned. Spell Reflect is pretty simple on the surface, but in another video we'll talk about some really great uses of it. Paladins can spec into Speed of Light or Long Arm of the Law to quickly get around, and can use Hand of Freedom to remove snares on themselves and allies. Never forget about Lay on Hands to save someone's life in a pinch, and Hand of Protection, preferably on ranged casters. Melee will probably not be so thankful. Or Hammer of Justice, which can be just as effective as an interrupt as a stun on meleeing mobs. Druids can use Displacer Beast or Sprint to get away from enemies if they need to be kited around, and Feral Charge to close gaps just like a warrior. They can also remove threat entirely with Preemptive Entangling Roots or a well-timed Cyclone. Remember that if you choose Feral Charge, its effect will change in other forms and can be used on friendly players like a form of Warrior's Intervene. A lot of these abilities are talented for Druids, so keep in mind which one will better apply to your current situation. Incapacitating Roar, for example, is a great way to interrupt all mobs briefly, just like a Warrior's Fear. Monks can roll all over the place, using Tiger's Lust, which can also be thrown on allies to help them run away from problems, and also have Leg Sweep to stun all nearby mobs. You can also incapacitate all mobs around you with a glyphed Breath of Fire, or a single target with Paralysis. Don't forget it, it is a short cooldown and just as effective as a Rogue's Blind. Death Knights, as I mentioned earlier, can use Gorfian's Grasp and Death Grip, but also have access to Strangulate, a very useful anti-magic shell, which can also be used to prevent the application of harmful magical effects, and Death's Advance, which can give you the small speed boost you need to run out of danger. Remember to practice moving mobs around, keeping them in places most beneficial to you and your group, and be ready to catch their deadly abilities with your own crowd control for a smooth journey through dungeons and raids. See you around next time with more tanking tips. Good luck, and have fun out there.